As I have said, this is the second part of the video. We are going to talk about the second type of movement, which is passivization. Everybody remembers that we studied active and passive voice in a traditional way. In order to change a sentence from active into passive, we just drop the subject and we move the object into the subject position. But now we study passivization from the transformational perspective, or specifically from the minimalist point of view. Look here in example number 27, as you see here. So we have a passive sentence here. The students were arrested. The student is the subject, agent, نائب الفاعل, where is the auxiliary, and arrested is the past participle. According to the minimalists, they say that the subject here, the students, the DP, the noun phrase, has been raised, has been moved in a successive cyclic fashion. There is no direct movement here. They say, first of all, as you see in this example here, the subject, this one, you see that these students, first of all, it functions as a complement or the object of the passive participle arrested. First it functions as a complement here of the passive participle arrested, and then by an application or by a process of movement, it is moved from this position into this position to function here this time as the subject of the verb phrase, as if we can say in this way, the students arrested the students. By the way, as we have studied in the subject raising, when this complement, the students, the object of the passive participle verb arrested, is moved from this position, this one, into this one, it leaves a trace. That is why we use the symbol T to refer to trace, the original position, الأثر مالته، الأصل مالته، الموقع الأصلي. And then later on, in a third movement, في نقلة ثالثة, the students, the DP, this noun phrase, is moved to function here as the subject of the auxiliary were. So as we have seen from this simple example, that in passivization, first of all, we see that the subject of the passive sentence of the passive verb first functions as a complement here of the passive participle verb, as if we have the students arrested the students, and then in the first movement it is moved to function as the subject of the verb phrase. At each time it leaves a trace behind it, and finally in a third movement it is moved from the subject of the verb phrase into the subject of the auxiliary were, which is the passive participle here. By the way, you have to keep in mind, طبعا verb phrase is a lower position. The highest phrase is what? Is the auxiliary phrase. Let's take another example about passivization. Here we have example number 13. You see here we have also auxiliary phrase in the passive sentence. There were several students arrested. There were several students arrested. Several students is what is a qualifier. It is a quantifier phrase. Several, some, any, many, much. These are called quantifier because they refer to the quantity. It is said that here, for example, here, several students, first of all, it functions as what? As a complement of the passive participle arrested, and then it is moved in the first movement to function as the subject of the verb phrase, and then there where we have expletive, there it functions as the subject of the auxiliary where. By the way, we have another type of passivization. You see, as in this example, as in diagram number 34, he is thought to admire her. He is thought to admire her. Here, you see that we have another type of passivization. Here, by the way, we have a subject raising here. So, passivization takes two different forms. Either we move the, complement here, the object of the verb into the subject one. And in this time, also, we have two processes within one process. We have also subject raising here, as in this example. Yani the second type of passivization is what is subject raising here. Look here, he is thought to admire her. According to the minimalist, they say that he is thought to admire her. The subject he, first of all, functions here as the subject, as a determiner of the verb phrase. He admired her, and then by a process of raising, we raise the subject of the movement here. Here, this time, it is not the object that it is moved, as in the previous example. The students were arrested where the object is moved. Here, the subject is moved. So, passivization, the second form of passivization is subject raising here. So here the subject is moved. You see that from a subject of a verb phrase into a subject of what? Of infinitive phrase. And it leaves a trace here behind it. And then the next movement of the subject here, it is moved here to function as what? As the subject of the verb phrase. He thought to admire her. And finally, when we change the verb thought into passive voice, is thought, the last and the fourth movement here, the subject is raised, is moved to function as the subject of the auxiliary is. So just I want to repeat once again. The second type of passivization is subject movement. And in this time, it is the subject that is raised from one position into another till it functions as the subject of the passive verb. But in the first form of passivization, which is the usual one, the traditional one, it is the object that is moved from the complement position into the subject position. But this time, the subject is moved and not the object, from the subject, of a verb phrase into a subject of an infinitive phrase, and then in the third movement as the subject of the verb phrase, and finally it is moved as the subject of the auxiliary within a passive sentence. Let's explain once again these four types of movements in this diagram. Look here, it is said that the subject he, this one, first of all, it functions as the subject, this he, as the subject of the verb admire. And then, so it is a subject, it is not object, not complement. And then it is moved to function as a subject of a higher phrase, which is the infinitive phrase. Here we have he. Remember, at each time when it is moved from one position into another, it leaves what? A trace, T, al-athar. And in a third movement, this determiner, this subject, the pronoun he, is moved in the third movement to function as what? As the subject of the verb phrase or of the verb thought also it leaves a trace here, and the last and the fourth movement, it is moved to function as the subject within an IP phrase. This time it is the subject of the auxiliary is he is thought to admire her. So once again, we have seen that in passivization also we have a cyclic fashion and not a direct one. So in the first type, where we have the complement movement, the object or the complement is moved from the complement, from the object position into a subject position of the passive participle verb, and then in a next movement it is moved to function as the subject of the auxiliary. But in subject raising, as we have seen in example number 34, this one, here we have subject raising as a form of passivization, where the subject originates first within an internal verb phrase, and then it is moved to function as the subject of the infinitive phrase. Once again, it is moved to function as the subject of the verb phrase, and finally, the final movement, it is moved to function as the subject of the auxiliary. So we have understood from these examples that movement in English syntax is an operation where a word or a phrase is moved from one position into another one. Usually it is moved from a lower position into a higher one, yani from a lower into a higher one, and it takes two forms or two types: subject raising and passivization.